It's Shaun the sheep, it's Shaun the sheep. He even hangs about with those that cannot bleat. Yes, there's one thing that Shaun the sheep is, and that is very inclusive. Today I'm going to be reviewing his 2DS games because I genuinely am intrigued about how the claymation wallback would translate to a video game. Plus, it gives me a chance to use all of my terrible farm puns throughout the review. So if you think that these are a load of bollocks, well, I am not going to stop cow. Don't be pig ignorant. You can't duck this. But before we gate to the game, we mustn't forget to look at its inspiration. Sorry, I've changed my mind now. These are bad. Oh, I feel a little bit hoarse after that. Shaun the Sheep had his debut in the third Wallace and Gromit adventure, that being A Close Shave, which came out in 1995 and promptly scooped an Oscar the following year for creators Aardman Animations. In A Close Shave, Shaun escapes a villainous sheep-rustling robot dog called Preston and joins the titular pair in their efforts to rescue both Shaun's flock and Wallace's love interest, Windalina. Shaun's charming, wordless, goofery demeanour throughout the short made him an instant star, and I certainly remember the mint sauce-fearing farm animal becoming a merchandising juggernaut, with a gutted Shaun becoming a backpack for many a young lady at the college I was attending in the mid-90s. After another fleeting, or should I say fleecing, appearance in a 2002 Crazy Contraptions Wallace and Gromit short, Shaun eventually had enough kudos to get his own series in 2007. There have been 170 episodes of this so far, broadcast across the BBC channels, and latterly a 6th series first appearing on Netflix before returning home to Auntie Beeb. It's been sold to over 180 countries worldwide, has had a pair of Christmas specials, a spin-off for younger children in Timmy Time, and a pair of feature films. Wallace and Gromit only got one feature film. That ovine has certainly left you in the dirt, boys. The show itself is great, a slapstick tale of life on a farm, completely wordless, save for Vic Reeves belting out the theme tune. Despite having no dialogue, each of these plasticine critters have their own defined personas. The farmer is an aloof buffoon, oblivious to much of what is going on his yard. The pigs are a crew of vindictive bullies, Mower Mouth is a hyped-up angry goat, and Bits of the dog is an overly officious drill sergeant. But ultimately, he has a good sense of right and wrong. Although, to be honest, his snout being separate from his mouth freaks me out a little bit. But that's either genetics or a design choice by Aardman Animations, so it's not really his fault. There's the good boy. The sheep are less defined, but then that's the joke, they're sheep. Most of the adventures see the smart leader of the flock, Shaun, trying to round up his fleecy brethren for the overwhelmed Bitzer as they wander off and get themselves in all kinds of trouble. So, a brilliant show for the entire family, and one that has had a number of video games, from a slew of Android and iOS titles to a Switch game based on the second movie Farmageddon. Farmageddon, a movie which my friend once got wrong and called Sheep Impact, which is sort of funny when you think about it. There were even a series of short films designed entirely around the 3DS. Aardman designed them to be downloaded and watched on the 3DS, taking advantage of that system's 3D capability, so you could finally see the contours of Shaun's furry rump, if you're down with that, you big deviant. But today we're not talking about the 3DS, we're talking about the DS, the precursor to that machine, and indeed its pair of Shaun the Sheep games released by D3 Productions, that were released in October of 2008 and 2009 respectively. They were both developed by the now sadly defunct Art Company Limited. a developer that also developed games based on children's licenses like Rugrats, Scooby-Doo and Astro Boy. Despite being made in Japan, the first game only released in the West, with the second only coming out in Europe. The first game, simply called Shaun the Sheep, has a rather familiar premise. The sheep have gotten loose once again, and so Shaun must round up his errant flock before the farmer gets back from town. I've no idea what he'll do once he gets back. Maybe he'd beat the dog. That's dark. This sheep retrieval is achieved by wandering around a 3D interpretation of Mossy Bottom Farm, solving puzzles, looking for useful items in the thickets, and competing in a smattering of mini-games, all of which can be later accessed individually from the main menu. The game area isn't huge. You're restricted to the various barns, coops and fields surrounding the farmstead, but there's recognisable details for fans of the show, like the trash heap and the nearby circus tent. The sheep are hidden in a variety of places like trees and bushes, but some require a bit more work, such as finding the correct key or rescuing them via partaking in a mini-game. In this one, Timmy is in a spot of bother in the circus tent, and it's up to Shaun to catch him. Once rescued, sheep will assist Shaun in a variety of ways. Big Shirley's mass will soon clear porcine perils, for instance, and Bitzer is just a stylus tap away from getting rid of those pesky porkers and getting them back in line. It's a stripped-down, kid-friendly point-and-click that lets you use the D-pad as well as the stylus if you're that way inclined. Objects will feature interactive symbols if you're close enough to them, and it's generally pretty straightforward where you have to go next. Stars on the upper screen will denote the next location on the map. Each area is pretty small, so if you're either very young or thicker than a post-constipation cowpat, you won't be stuck for too long, unlike that cowpat. As soon as you locate a new sheep, something will trigger another part of the farm, making it accessible. As I said previously, the game map is pretty small, which means the game is also pretty short. Don't expect an ovine epic here. You can finish it in under 2 hours comfortably, but in a way that's a good thing. The source material is comprised of small, short 7-minute episodes after all, for those with a short body and an attention span to match. The mini-games in Shaun the Sheep are pretty much how you'd expect them to be, very DS-y. They are short, sometimes easy, sometimes frustrating, pastiches of classic games that require deft use of the stylus and occasionally the mic. They may offer a certain amount of replay value once they become accessible on the main screen, but I doubt it. They're not that good. The most successful thing that Shaun the Sheep does, though, and it is by no means a guarantee with these types of games, is it successfully captures the mood, the feel and the comedy of the animation on which it is based. From the cutscenes to how its menagerie of characters react and interact, it's pretty much spot on. Don't expect Shaun the Sheep's first adventure, though, to blow your wool off. It is, though, a perfectly serviceable waste of an hour or so, particularly for a little un. IGN gave it a 6.5 and said that Shaun the Sheep is a fun little point-and-click adventure that is fun while it lasts, when they gave it the review treatment back in October 2008. Nintendo Power, though, they didn't much care for it. To them it deserved no more than a 40%, and they said that the unlockable mini-games were not enough to make the game any more entertaining than counting sheep. The second title, Shaun the Sheep Off His Head, came out just a year later, as previously mentioned, exclusively for us here in that there the Europe. This title sees yet another disaster for the farmer. He has just purchased a hairpiece to conceal his balding pate, no doubt with an eye on charming the rural lasses back to his stone-clad abode. However, an errant gust of wind sullies that potential lusty plan, and so he corrals his faithful dog Bitzer to retrieve it. Bitzer sensibly delegates the responsibility to a much smarter quadruped, Shaun, who then sets out on an adventure which forms this game's quest. The first thing you'll notice is that there are a lot of assets reused in the central hub from the first game. The field and chicken coop are very much identical, as are the sprites of the beasts that make up this Aardman animated world. As soon as you leave the first area though, you'll be in a different presentation of the farm and its familiar surroundings. In this game, the surrounding area of Mossy Bottom and its agricultural business are presented in segmented stages. These stages are missions as Shaun desperately tries to catch up with various creatures like ducks, moles and Pidsley the cat, who will all have possession of the syrup at different times, only to end up getting constantly thwarted. You can return to the central field whenever you like, and you may have to, as unlike the previous game, you now have energy hearts. These can be depleted by pigs, frogs, sprinklers and bees.
What is that? What is it? Oh, no, not the bees! Not the bees! Ah!
You can replenish this health bar by feeding Shaun apples which can be purchased by returning the hen's children, which act as currency. How many chicks have you got, lady? And does this reflect poorly on the farmer? He's clearly not collecting enough of these eggs before they hatch. The game is still largely puzzle-based, but it's more a fetch quest-based affair now, with later levels requiring you to go across multiple different stages to get various objects, and all the killer earthworms and robot sheepdogs that this entails. There's a slight flaw that sometimes it's tempting, once you've acquired a part, to simply just put your mutton chops in harm's way. A death means you'll just be returned to the sheep field without any recrimination. I'm glad you can mind, because there's nothing too exciting about returning to these stages. Much like most of rural England, once you've seen one bush-surrounded field, you've seen them all. The game isn't very diverse, apart from a brief sojourn down into an underground mole burrow. There's some very brief and very frustrating stealth elements in the game at certain points, but they're just not very good. You have to hide behind particular brushes in order to get your pursuer to move on. If you're seen, you have to redo it again. The mini-games in this game are less reliant on the stylus or the mic than the previous Shaun game, and so are a great deal less creative. Special mention though to the Pidsley the cat John Woo cover shooter food fight, as that bit is genuinely excellent. Overall, it's different enough from the first Shaun the Sheep game, so it's worth a look, but it's clearly a little bit less creative and a touch more rushed than its predecessor. Definitely the weaker of the two. So if you want to play one, play the first one. You may well find that playing both is too big a price to pay. To pay? I said I'd stop with the puns, didn't I? Due to the European-only release, reviews are a little bit thin on the ground for this one, with the only review I could find from the time coming from that well-known gaming periodical, the Lancashire Telegraph, on the 13th of November 2009. They gave it a 4 out of 5 and said for Aardman fans, it's an exciting prospect to dive into episodes of Shaun the Sheep and recreate the fun and unique silent movie humour. Will I ever mention the Lancashire Telegraph again? So now lamb is off the menu, what shall we look at next? Well, how about Benji? You know, Benji the dog, as he uses the power of the Commodore 64 to explore the outer reaches of the solar system. Does he? Anyway, woof woof, woof woof, woof woof woof, or until next time, like, subscribe and K thanks, bye. I speak dog now.